It's not trying to eliminate environmental impact. It's understanding that impact should come with offset, with restoration, with creation of nature.
Welcome to the GOAT Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Cassinan. At GOAT, we define sustainability through the lens of intentionality, circularity, and community. With this framework, any problem can be solved. The stories that we share, the pioneers that we talk to, show us a different way to build the future we all want to have.
We're at a pivotal moment where nuclear is needed more than ever. Let's once and for all become a circular economy.
Waste is not cost neutral. Like, it always costs your business something. So if you can get rid of that, then that's good for business as well.
There's this dissonance. We talk a really good game about protecting the ocean, but the purchase decisions that we make don't match with our espoused values.
An ideal food system revolves around relationship. Where is my food coming from? Who's growing it? How is it being grown? And why does that matter?
Thanks for being here. Let's dive into the conversation. You know, one of the most exciting things is like getting a true picture around what sustainability actually is. And I think in that challenge, I think there's so much miscommunication around how to best support the planet. And I think that's whether it's from an energy perspective or a product perspective or a carbon perspective, but your specific approach that you have is unique because it's focused on, you know, nature being nature. And so, I mean, I know we'll get more deeply into biodiversity credits and everything, but first of all, where are you coming from? Because I think that's one of the other cool parts is that we kind of have this international footprint, and I think that the more people get a perspective around what the global perspective of sustainability is, the better.
Yeah. Okay. So where am I coming from? So the small answer is Colombia, right? Colombia, basically, it's located in the northern part of South America, so right above the equator. We're one of the tropical countries, and that becomes important because in that belt, in that tropical belt, is where you'll find most of the biodiverse or mega diverse countries in the world. Um, Given that Colombia has a bad rep, you know, um, I think it's also because of that possibility of biodiversity in Colombia. Um, so we have a huge issue with drug dealers, but basically the main cause is that in Colombia you can actually plant coca leaves, and that's not something that you can do around the world. No, it only works in tropical belt. So it comes with perks and it comes with challenges. But yeah, that's where I come from.
Well, I think it's cool because I mean I worked in coffee earlier in my career, and one of the interesting parts is you grow coffee generally. They're working on doing it outside of it, but you grow it generally between the tropics, and it's always like you know, depending on where you're growing the coffee, it'll have, you know, certain unique characteristics of each coffee that you're actually tasting or roasting or growing. And Colombian coffee usually just has like this nuttiness flavor to it in the soil, and there's actually like a biodiversity component to actually the coffee that comes from Colombia. And I just always found that really interesting about, you know, South American coffees versus African coffees. And, you know, I think a lot of the places that we look to around the world, they have such unique things. And I agree with you. Like Colombia does have a bad rap, unfortunately. But what are some of like the really great parts about it? Like the side that people don't think about or don't know about or never told besides, you know, the drug problem.
Man, it's really cool because first, just the geographical location of Colombia uh, is pretty amazing, both like in strategic terms. Now we have access to the Caribbean Sea, to the Atlantic Ocean. We have access to the Pacific Ocean. We're right next to Panama. Panama used to be part of Colombia. We in Colombia is where the Andes mountain range ends. So it starts really far down in Chile, it goes all the way up South America, and it ends in Colombia with three main mountain ranges. That because you're in the tropics and because you don't have the seasons, um, the seasons come with altitude. So if you go high up in the mountains, you get snow. If you go way down to the sea level, you always have good weather. You always have summer, basically. And in between is that you have these very stable ecosystems that are the ones that, for example, coffee requires, that are the ones that, for example, cocoa requires, that are the ones that, for example, coca requires. No, but then you have such richness in terms of nature because of this stability, because you don't have that seasonal change, um, that most of the evolution has occurred, uh, like it seems slowly, but it's actually very permanent. No, so you have this. Yeah, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, but there are these theories around how if you go to the extremes of climate change or biodiversity loss, what would actually happen? And what some people think is that these huge ecosystems will start to shrink up to a point where you get the place where they were actually born, let's say. No, and those places are the most, let's say, strategic in terms of conservation, but they're also the oldest. So those are the places where you probably have some of the oldest forests in the world, some of the most uh, uh, let's say, I'm not sure how to say it, but the oldest creatures as well. So the least evolved creatures are there, and you probably get now that's the way the world works in terms of just um, dealing with crisis. And we have many of those places in Colombia. In the Putumayo region, you have one of those spots. Well, we have part of the Amazon. I mean, it's a very interesting place just in terms of nature. For example, one in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, that's just a huge mountain right next to the sea. It's the tallest mountain right next to the sea in the world. No? And that's in the tropics, and that's where a lot of indigenous communities were based. And it's just an incredible place. You have Ciudad Perdida, not like the lost city of this of these tribes. And um, but then again, no, those are the tribes that started with the coca plantations because they chew on it. You have coffee around those mountain ranges. Uh, no, it's a really amazing place. It's a really amazing place, and you have deserts, and you have rainforests, and you have cloud forests, and you have beaches. You have the whole Pacific coast, which is one of the most humid places on Earth. Uh, Biodiversity there is just it's thriving so much. Um, but you also have, for example, a lot of gold um, deposits throughout those rivers. That I mean, when the Spaniards came to America, um, gold was what they found. The indigenous communities, they just no, they were all decorated in gold. Gold figures are just part of what they did, um, because there's so many gold in the ground, and you can find it in the rivers, and that's also no, it's then a blessing, but one of the biggest issues around biodiversity today and biodiversity loss is illegal gold mining. So you have no, it's just a place of very high contrasts, and in everything. No, you see Bogota, for example. Bogota. Bogota can have the productivity of a European country, but you go to that region, to the Pacific coast in Colombia, and you can have poverty levels that are worse than the worst African country. There are huge contrasts. We have huge issues around, let's say, development, because the country is so diverse and so broken by large mountains. Um, Connectivity is always an issue. Bogota is located in the center of the country, uh, which was interesting when the country got independent. Let's say it was a way of uniting all of the territories: Venezuela, Ecuador, Panama. They were all joined in a big country that was the Great Colombia, and there was a big capital right in the center. But then we forgot, for example, to develop our coasts. Um, no, the developing from the inside of the country with those mountain ranges is a huge engineering deal around roads, and not just taking electricity everywhere, and you can still see that around the country. There are places that you could, they could be from the 1930s. Um, but we're so rich. No, we're so rich in minerals. We have oil. We have, no, we have biodiversity. We have, so it's yeah, it's a place of contrasts, but definitely a place you should visit because it's super beautiful.
Wow. And where did the fascination for just nature come from for you? I mean, like what kind of sparked this inside of you? Has this always been something just ingrained in you?
I'm not really sure. I'm Yeah, like natural documentaries like Discovery Channel and National Geographic and stuff. I'm not really sure. I didn't even study it. I'm a mechanical engineer. Um, so I think it's a mixture of things. We did watch a lot of documentaries when I was growing up in my house. Um, and of course, if you live here, then the nature becomes not just part of your holidays, for example. No, you just leave the city, and there it's there. No, it's just um, but but yeah, I'm not really sure. I think, I mean, I've always liked it, but professionally, when I was studying, when I was in university, um, like climate change was just starting as a thing, and I was studying mostly energy and energy generation, um, and basically that's when I got into just wind energy. I find it beautiful. It's nothing. No, I just think it's really nice to understand aerodynamics and to understand that you can actually create electricity from it. And that's how I became interested, like professionally, into nature, and understanding like the big uh, issues of climate in the world, and understanding that those are basically something that everyone should be thinking about. And no, and that was it. But yeah, I'm not really sure. I think that for real, that nature documentaries were, no, it's just so amazing to see.
Living in a place where you do have such biodiversity, and you're living in a place that is so naturally beautiful, I think it kind of just becomes part of the DNA. Like I was lucky enough to grow up across the street from a forest, and it's like the more time you spend in there, the more time you just kind of go, "Wow, this is great." And I always believed like live where you vacation. Basically, is you can vacation in your own home, and if you're lucky enough to live in like this beautiful place, that you grew up in, what you can travel and the world is beautiful, but like you also have this wonderful place right in your backyard. And I think that you just kind of it gets in that DNA almost of just like loving it.
Yeah, yeah. Now that you mention it, look, I have a 4-year-old girl. She's Her name is Agustina. She's beautiful. But the thing is, during COVID, we left the city. The city, no, before the lockdowns. Like it was, everyone in Colombia was like, okay, what's going to happen? What's going to happen in Bogota? They say, okay, we're going to try, no, a lockdown. It's not an official lockdown. And me and my wife were like, oh, no, what's going on? So we just left the city, and we went. Fortunately, no, her mother has this farm. It's like 3 hours away from Bogota, but it's warm weather, and we just went there because we didn't know what was going to happen. We ended up staying there 8 months. Agustina couldn't walk. She learned how to walk there, and you should see her relationship with just bugs and beetles and butterflies. And no, she's not a girl that's frightened by anything. No, she even asks, no, Dad, can I pick that one up? No, like, is it dangerous? Or because if it's not, then she'll just pick it up, and she's very careful. And that's something that I think it's going to be ingrained in her just because of those 8 months that we lived there, and that she started moving around. So yeah, I think it might be something that is, yeah, it's just part of our culture as Colombians, I guess. um Hopefully it'll be ingrained in her for her life.
Where do you think that line is on, kind of the education of nature? Because I think that's so beautiful and so cool. And I think that there's so much about nature, I think that I wouldn't say we're afraid of, but we're uncertain about. And so we will, be like, oh, well, I don't want to, touch that thing or interact with it or figure out how that thing works. But the more we learn about it, almost, the more fascinating the entire thing gets. It's kind of like my latest fascination right now is the ocean, and it's like we don't understand. I mean, I've always loved the ocean, but I've lately been more curious about, what's in there, how does it work, like fully, and because we don't understand anything about the ocean, and it's this whole vast, unexplored, incredibly diverse area, that is a incredible ecosystem. And so where do you think that line is on, like, for us as people to start to interact more with nature? Where's that line of, like, actually being curious and educating yourself, um and then does that tie into, like, how you want to protect it?
One of the most fascinating things for me is understanding just nature in general, but you start with species. No, if you understand how species operate, no, what are their strategies for finding food? What are their strategies for reproduction? What are their strategies for nesting? It's so it's so amazing that actually exists without conscience. That just happens. So for me, just evolution is so amazing. No, it's just, if you actually think about it, if you think where we are sitting now through computers, it's so crazy, uh, and trying to to understand that actually comes from natural processes. For me, that's no that basically takes off the scary part about nature. Um, and you just understand that all species are different. So you know, when I was young, we used to grab frogs. No, some now people are afraid of frogs. Um, all sorts of insects as well. No, but you have to understand how they work. No, some are dangerous. No, but watch it with snakes. But if you actually understand snakes, you can also grab snakes. I think it's all about understanding, and just the fact that you mentioned that, no, like that education. I think it's something that it's difficult to teach in a classroom. I think it's something that you get by experiencing nature, uh, and that's something that probably a lot of people now. They just can't experience, right? Um, so I think that's really important. That's It's just something that we need to value. Um, in the other hand, you there's you know there's there's this thing that I actually hate around like environmental education, and I just hate it is because this should be education. It's not a separate thing. No, it's not like environmental education is something that you should add to regular. No, this is part of our world right now, and we should all understand this, and this should be embedded in what we teach kids, not just in school, but in our families and what we talk about. And well, we're just finishing COP 28, and it's like this is actually happening. This shouldn't be part of the additional education that we get to people. This is something that should actually be engraved, no, like the pensum of every child in the world. Um, and if you do that, and you understand that, no, everything we do, not just in our houses, not just in our cities, not just in our companies, but everything you do is actually connected to nature in some way. Um, then that line, I mean, there shouldn't be a line, you know. This is actually, it's part of us. It's part of where we come from. That's nature, no? And you mentioned the oceans, yes, of course, and no, just how much we use the oceans. No, we're not we're not there yet, but but in terms of climate catastrophe, everything related to the ocean would basically take humanity, no, and just step on it and, crush humanity, because we live off the ocean so much and we don't really understand them. So yeah, I don't know. It becomes a bit philosophical, and but I think we should all understand a bit more that connection, the fact that we are nature, the fact that cities are no are suck off the ecosystem services, no, those big words that climate scientists use, but it's how the world works. Um, not just geography. You you should understand the world as geography, because it's so important. No, where your food comes from, where you are located, why you are there, and why is it a good place to live. Um, Even though people find it, no, for I don't know. Here in Colombia, you talk about Canada. It's like, dude, it's so cold. Who would like to live there? No, why would anyone go there? But if you go to Canada and you mention the Amazon rainforest, it's like, dude, that's filled with things that can kill you. Why would anyone live there? No, it's just they both have these huge amounts of opportunities and risks. But if you understand it, and if you understand all the connections, I mean, it's all part of the same thing, no?
Yeah. Well, and I think that we forget that a lot of the time. It's that we are a species in nature. We're not separate. And the line is not separate. And I think, when you realize that nature is powerful. Yes, there are a lot of things in the Amazon that can kill you. There are also a lot of things in Canada that can kill you too.
Yeah,
Most
yeah.
being like it's part of realizing that us as a species, yes, you could call us higher on the food chain, so to speak, but nature is the ultimate equalizer in the whole thing. I mean, if you hop in the ocean or you climb a mountain, there is very much a risk of not surviving because nature's more powerful. And that's where I think that there's this beautiful relationship that I think that can be formed with nature. It's a respect, and it's also a symbiosis, a symbiotic relationship where we can rely on one another to actually live together. And I think that's what we forget, is to like live with nature, not live on top of nature. And I think that the more people can actually experience nature. I mean, back to you saying like the education, it should just be ingrained. I mean, go out and experience it. I mean, not everybody has immediate access to incredible nature, but at the same time, our entire planet is a vastly diverse ecosystem. So it's like, if you're in a desert, I mean, some of the guests on the podcast, their favorite place ever on the planet Earth is the desert, because they're absolutely incredible sunsets, and the actual horizon is unreal. And there's just unique areas kind of everywhere you go, and I think that the more people can integrate with whatever they are surrounded by, it's even better. I mean, it's most cities you can get out of the city, so maybe take a day and head out of the city for a little bit and then come back in, and just see how that experience was. I always find like the great reset for myself is to just spend some time in nature. And that's actually the next kind of question for you is, how do you find your reset? 'Cause, I mean, we'll get into kind of what you're building and what you're doing day to day, but I mean, I would imagine you have to have a little bit of a reset in your life when you're kind of managing a company and building something. It's always like there's so many things to do. I mean, that was what we talked about before we started recording. It's like there's always like a wave of things to do. How do you kind of reset what you do?
Going to nature. No.
Yeah.
No. Of course, I mean, I think there's just many ways. I like reading a lot. That's something that I think everyone should do, and you should do it always. And for me, that's sort of like a reset. Um, and I have so many uh, unfinished books, and I read so many books at the same time all the time, because you're trying to, read about work, or you're trying to read about management, but you also like novels, and you have just, and every time you open a book, I think that's sort of like a reset. um so I like that a lot. It's just for me a way to unwind. But then also traveling, I mean, that's no in the here in Colombia, we no, everyone hates Bogota. No, the people that live in Bogota, they all hate it, but they won't live anywhere else, right? It's actually a great city. I love it, but people here say the best thing about Bogota is just leaving Bogota, not just going out of the city, as you mentioned, because it's so beautiful, and because you have, no, 30 minutes away, you have really beautiful mountains, really cold weather. 2 hours away, you have really warm weather. So you can just choose, okay, are we going to winter or summer? Well, no, what do you feel like? Do you want a pool? Do you want, and that's a beautiful thing. And yeah, traveling outside the city is just one of the most amazing things about Bogota. And if you can do it around Colombia, then you're privileged. Um, so, for example, you were mentioning, not just in terms of us being part of nature, and us being able to also have strategies for where we live. No, how can people live in the desert and in the snow and in the rainforest? Those are also huge, delicate, very well planned strategies. But if you can go, for example, in Colombia, to where indigenous communities live and have lived for thousands of years, uh, and even today still have most of the same, I don't know, ways of life they did years ago. That, I mean, you have to have the ability to surprise yourself and understand that, no, it's not about who did it best, but in terms of just sustainability, they're winning. No, they've been living there for years. They know how to hunt. They know how to fish. They know how to grow crops. They've been living in the same environment and have kept it as it is, without disturbances or huge disturbances. And when they disturb it, they move, and they understand how the cycles work. There's such a deep understanding of nature, uh, that that also, it just, it's super liberating to, no, just be thinking about work, have to travel there, and just get completely disconnected by your work because it doesn't really matter. No, you just need to focus on the big objectives that are. This is something that you need in the world that can't fade away. This is something that, no, it's part of what we should be preserving for future generations and stuff. No, I connected it to think global, act local, but that's a part of of the job that I love. And yeah, surprisingly, that also it just disconnects you from reality, from stress, from. It's just really amazing to see people, in those habitats, just being happy, being growing families and understanding nature. It's super amazing.
Well, I think that's also really part of the discussion around sustainability, climate change, and any kind of changes that need to happen in society. Usually, one of the first areas of conversation is food access, water access. How do we, quote unquote, keep our home? And the indigenous population has been doing that for generations, thousands of years. Um, it's almost like a lot of the discussion is around, not necessarily stepping backwards in what we're doing as a society, because it's very hard to do with the general population, but it's like, how do we think more, systematically about how we're doing what we're doing? And I think it's a simplicity. It's like, what is fulfillment for a person? And I think that part has been not lost, but slightly forgotten in society. I think the fulfillment is, where it's been so centered around, how many homes can we have? Can we fly on a private jet to get where we need to go? Can we do, all these crazy things? It's almost painted as like the fulfillment picture, right? But what if, but when we start to think about the moments that I guess you're happiest in life, like truly, truly happy, those memories that you hold on to forever, most likely that wasn't the opportunity to fly on a private jet. Most likely that wasn't the opportunity of like the big, promotion at work or the big award. It was actually the moment that you were, either with your close friends or with your family, or you had a moment in nature. Like those are the things you always remember. That I don't know how to best like encourage that in society, like an awareness around it. But I think that that's one of the secrets to like reframing uh, the climate discussion. Like yes, of course there needs to be solutions, but at the same time, the mindset needs to be, what do we deem important? And I think the prioritization of what we view as important is like one of the biggest things to shift.
You mentioned two things that I really liked. One, I think it's just if how we understand. I'm not sure if that's the term, but like loading capacity of where you live, no, and what that means. So we, no, the modern human is just really successful at growing, and not understanding that we live in a place that has a maximum capacity. No, that's something that doesn't occur with those indigenous communities. Um, they usually have a size. Those communities have a strict size, and when it's getting too big, they just multiply into more communities. Um, but it's always around the capacity of your territory. I think that's something that we definitely need to understand, and just connecting to that more spiritual part of what it means to be happy, whatnot. Like I'm not I'm not very spiritual myself, but I do think that we need to start putting more value to what's really important in life. Um, no? For example, have you heard of the inner development goals? Um, like parallel to the sustainable development goals, there's this whole movement around, hey, you should first need to address yourself and understand, inside you what needs to happen for development to actually occur properly. Um, it's an interesting approach. It's an interesting approach. No, you always have the same doubts of how that can be scaled, and if you should actually incorporate this into the educational system, and what we were talking about environmental again, that sort of thing. Um, but I think it is important for people to become more aware of just what I mean, where you are, what you can do to help, why you are happy when you are happy, why you value your family, why you value nature, why you value the place where you live, where you grew up in. And if you understand that that can be lost with everything that's happening, it might feel far away, and the international discussions and everything, it feels so far away, but it's actually going to affect us, all of us, um, and then it becomes existential, and then you actually feel okay. No, I know, but we actually in Bogota we're really high up in the mountains, no? So it's like 2,600 meters above sea level. Um, we won't have an issue with ocean rise. It's not going to be an issue here, but it's going to be an issue for most of the population in the world. And if that happens, then it becomes personal. Now, if you're going to lose your place, no, the place where you grew up and where you were born, that you love, because it's just going to be underwater, then no, then everyone should actually, take responsibility for what they could do, or what pressure they could put on garments, um, companies, products, I don't know, everything.
Well, and I think a lot of it is about the exploration of like how we live our lives. I mean, I think that's a lot of the problem has always been, I guess, framed in the sense of like it's someone else's problem, meaning like it's the company, it's the government, it's another country, it's a X, Y, and Z. But realistically, it's overwhelming. Like for the person, it's like, well, if I can't do anything, why would I do anything? And it's like when you all collectively do that, it's like, okay, well, nothing gets done. And so, I think part of this is really finding what your capacity is. Like if you can live a little bit more simply because you just want to or don't need as much, then great. Um, and I think that but too much of the climate conversation has been so centered around restriction rather than the benefit to just living a more fulfilled life in whatever sense the word that is for you. And that's where I just find it it's a really interesting thing when you start to look deeply into like the psychology around the decisions and why things are moving forward versus why they're not moving forward. And a lot of it just feels like it's a helplessness side of things, because, and this is where I think it kind of leads in nicely to kind of what you're working on is, you have a lot of this conversation around carbon and carbon credits, and it's like, well, what can I do? I can't afford an electric vehicle at the moment. And, electric vehicles also have a ginormous footprint in the production of what they do. It takes quite a few thousand miles to actually overcome an internal combustion engine. And you have the affordability standpoint. And so sometimes it's like, well, what do I do about the carbon thing then? And it's like, well, I can my lights, my energy, I still need water, like kind of feels helpless. And you and I have discussed this, like carbon is just one unit of measurement in this whole problem. It's not the measurement. And there isn't a silver bullet for it, but what's the way that you view sustainability?
It's a huge question, but but look, it's if you could narrow it down, first is sustainability is relative. No, and that's important. No, it's not either you're sustainable or you're not. No, it's you're more sustainable than your previous self, no, that than a previous state. Um, and that's important because it's all about trajectories, where you're headed, what you want to accomplish. So of course, carbon, no, carbon is a huge issue. Um, it's something that it's been discussed so much in the last, I don't know, 10 years, maybe more, that people already understand it, that people are, no, and that you can actually have those sort of conversations that are second level conversations around carbon. Oh, the footprint of creating an electric vehicle. Yes, of course. And it's always going to be there. Not your silver bullet is right on point, because when you speak about environmental impact, there's always going to be impact. No, it's part of who we are. It's not trying to eliminate environmental impact. It's understanding that impact should come with, I don't know, offset, with restoration, with creation of nature. The thing is that we're in debt right now, and that's the whole conversation around carbon. We just emitted too much. And it's an issue, but it doesn't mean that we have to go back and live as indigenous communities. We actually have so many more possibilities now. We have so many brains thinking about this, um, that we can solve problems, I think. Um, but you do need to understand that this is, well, for me it's, I try to understand it in terms of science, but it's mostly that, you put things into a black box and something comes out, and you always have, you always have a residue. No, and if you understand that, what you put in, what comes out, and what's your residue, then you can understand that, no, pollution works the same way. Deforestation works the same way. Emissions work the same way. How species live, no, habitats, ecosystem, it works the same way. Even the no, the industries, just the food works the same way. Mining works the same way. Oil works the same way. No, everything works like that. They become complex systems once you put them all together. But if you separate each of them, they're actually quite simple. And if you do that, no, if you actually understand those systems individually, and you understand that sustainability is a process and it's relative, then you can make everything more sustainable. Everything, no, from your, no, what you eat for breakfast to the car that you drive. And not everyone should know all of the details around it. Uh, I think it becomes, just in terms of communication, if you try for everyone to understand how a lithium battery works, and why its footprint is so important, and where the lithium is coming from, and if that mining is worse than the oil being burnt, and no, it's just too much for people to actually be able to take decisions into their own hands. Um, so that's for, no, for specialists to do. But if you understand that there are things that you can do, there are trends that everyone agrees on. I think basically that's sustainability. No, it's a weird answer, but but that's what it is. Um, Now, for me, I mean, I because I started in engineering and energy. Um, my work was first focused on just industrial activities and mining and oil, and uh, now it's become more focused on biodiversity. And the thing is, if you try to find a silver bullet, I think, my opinion, is that everything could be solved way faster if we just create more nature, huh? More natural habitats. If we're able to understand that trees are actually carbon capture machines, if you actually understand that ecosystems are where we get everything from, including food, including wood, including material, then creating nature becomes that silver bullet. That silver bullet. Sorry. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's a bit more complex, but I'm not saying that we don't need to decarbonize. I think we should. That's a debt that we have. That's something that everyone needs to work on. Um, we need to electrify our lives, and remove fossil fuels eventually from them. That will bring additional environmental impacts, of course, and those impacts will have to be dealt with in a better way than what we've been doing so far. Uh, but I think the way forward uh, is just getting everything that we've learned so far and just applying it. And yes, of course, the mining, and yes, of course, the batteries, and yes, of course, the steel and whatnot, and the food production. Those are all big issues. Um, the thing is that knows, I mean, they're they're all around dealing with the first and most important problem for our planet. That's climate change. So yeah, it's a complex problem.
It definitely, and that is one of those things where I've tried to explain that as much as possible. Is like this. What I love though is that you simplified it in a really cool way. Like it really is. If you take each thing as what it is, you have an input, you have an output, and then you have a residue. And I love the way you framed that because it's science based from the standpoint of energy is created nor destroyed. Like it it just is. That part, it makes sense easily for most. And then it's just breaking it down into little blocks. Because you're right, when it is all stacked up, super confusing and honestly incredibly complex, even for people like you and I who are surrounded by this type of information all the time. Even then, you're like, wow, that's a really complex problem. And it's like, what do we do about that? But I love the way you simplified it. And I think that what I find interesting about biodiversity, and it kind of like, you know, it hits the carbon credit side a little bit, but like the idea of trees. And I think this is one area that I think is very much misunderstood. Because, I've had a lot of conversations with people where they, are like, hey, carbon credit industry is great, but it also is bad. Just like almost any other industry, you have good actors and bad actors. You have people who are completely bulldozing fully grown trees, planting new ones, and calling it a carbon credit of new trees, when in fact they're not actually solving any of the problem. What does that look like in your industry? Because I think that's one of the hardest things for people to actually make sense of, is like, it's not just you write a check and it just suddenly your problem goes away. Like, oh well, let's just make impact and we'll just send a check to somebody and we'll make sure it's all taken care of in the background. It's fine. Like, how do you address that on your side?
It's a really interesting problem because I need to go back a bit. But first, the carbon market, everything around carbon, this is something that's necessary. And we need to understand that. The fact that we have a market is actually a planned thing. No, the market is the one that is going to take us where we want to be. Why? Because there are so many of us. There's so much noise. Not everyone can create the perfect carbon project to offset your footprint. That's something that's not going to be possible. We need for a market to come in, no, and help us. And the whole buildup of a market, no, has been has been hard. It's something that we're actually seeing right now, but it's, at least in my opinion, it's the strategy forward. We need that market, and we need for it to be 100 times bigger. Okay, having said that, and I agree with you, there are good actors, there are bad actors. The market is going to, or should, benefit the good ones, punish the bad ones, and that's how markets operate. So eventually, no, those bad actors will, no, they'll just stop existing. Um, but it is interesting to analyze it right now because we're in a crisis and because we need for that market to work so well, no, that everyone's, something happens in the carbon market, a bad project occurs, and everyone's like, oh shit, oh what, why was nobody watching, why were they chopping down native forests to, no, why was that? There's this, no, there's this quote, Charlie Munger, okay, he just that, but he basically said, show me the incentive and I'll show you the result. And it's not a bad thing. The incentives around the carbon market need to be adjusted. And you need to understand better how to produce high integrity carbon credits and stuff. Um, but I think first this is normal. Okay. That was something that needed to be said, because once you understand that the market is actually the strategy for taking the climate crisis and actually trying to get results in a time frame that work, then you have the same problem with biodiversity. So the thing about carbon is that carbon created one single metric that was very, very easy for all scientists to understand. Also CO2. And then it was okay, no, but you have methane and you have, so it's CO2 equivalent. No? So you can actually take everything, into CO2 equivalents. But when scientists started thinking about scenarios, then the impacts were not going to be in CO2 equivalents. It was going to be in nature. And nature is so much more complex. No? So the system we were talking about, now your input, your output, your residue. That's how you work. That's how I work. No? You eat, you get energy, you have residue. Now that it's so simple. But a city of people is really complex. No? So complexity around systems is exactly the same as biodiversity. No? The thing is that impacts on biodiversity, because of their complexity, are something that is so hard to understand. No? So we talked, for example, earlier around the sea level rising. Yeah, but that's just one thing. What is actually going to happen to mangroves? What is going to happen when the ocean is more acidic? When everything's warmer? When no, is everything going to die? You can't really tell. Okay, so once you understand that complexity, then you get to the point where, okay, you need to understand that investing in biodiversity is as important as investing in carbon. Why? Because we are already on a trajectory that things will happen. Probably bad things will happen depending on where you're located. Um, and the way forward is to actually create more nature. You know? If you can do that, and if you understand that markets are the way forward, then the logic is okay. So we now need to create a way for people and companies and governments to invest in biodiversity, in something that's complex that they don't actually understand, but that they should get, no, in terms of just the benefits of, right? And I mean, the whole thing that we are working on is basically that. How do you take high integrity nature assets to a market that doesn't have to create projects to be able to invest in nature, but can just look at the portfolio of options and say, okay, these are good options. Where are they located? How are their methodologies used? Or who's actually verifying that what they are saying is true? No? And then that part of high integrity becomes super important. Um, and then I go back to to where the carbon market is. The carbon market is getting there, and we will probably see more bad actors. We will probably see adjustments, in order to fix those loopholes, those places where the bad actors can actually operate. We will probably see more standards, more stringent standards, more flexible standards. We will probably see a lot of things evolving. But the whole point is that the market doesn't fail because there are a few bad actors. No, and because we're making too much about the failures. I think that's something that you need to accept from any market. Not everything will be perfect. Um, and then when you get to the biodiversity market, the biodiversity market is so small right now, so insignificant. No? Um, but everyone's trying to build upon what has been working and what hasn't been working on the carbon market to actually create a new market, a new nature-based market. Um, First, that it's not focused on offsets, which is really important. Now, the whole part of the offsets is that you can have a single metric, the CO2 equivalent, so you can measure your footprint, and then if you measure your footprint and you buy the credits, and you can get to net zero. The whole point about a biodiversity market is that you're not just staying on zero, so you're paying your debt, you're actually creating. No? So then nature positive as a concept comes in. Um, and it's just the fact that biodiversity is unique. No? So in Colombia now we're one of the most biodiverse countries on earth. So yeah, that's important. Of course we should value that. But it's not because we're more biodiverse that you should only have projects of biodiversity in Colombia. Part of what international dialogues have said is that at this point, all ecosystems in the world are important and everything should be preserved and restored. And that means everywhere in the world, we should start having these sorts of projects where investments come in to save either deserts, either tundras, either Amazon forest, rainforest, cloud forest. It doesn't really matter because we need to create nature. So the whole aspect of the nature positive concept comes not by giving a priority to more biodiverse or more densely. No, biodiversity in a way is just density of species. Just we have so many species. It's not about that. It's just we need ecosystems to survive, to thrive, to restore.
So is it more about the preservation, restoration, or kind of so how would I guess the biodiversity credits work in if you're a company or you're an individual and you said, you know what, we've been on the carbon credit game for a little while, but like we get biodiversity. We're like, actually, we love this. What does it actually mean when somebody's like, I'm going to invest in biodiversity credits? Like, does it mean that like they're just preserving land, or is it they're adding more to the ecosystem? Like, what's kind of the benefit for the company or the individual?
So I can explain our side of it, what Terrasos does, because we actually because we're thinking about it, we created like a protocol, a methodology for that to be understood. But there are others. So I'll first start with Terrasos, and then we can mention others that are coming in the same direction. So first of all, in terms of preservation and restoration, one of the possibilities is if you understand the level of threat of a particular ecosystem, then that's the first point of decision making that you need to address. So if you have a highly threatened ecosystem, first try to preserve as much as you can. Because if you don't, you lose it. And if you lose it, it's gone. No? That's the same with species. No, it's basically the same concept, and that's why the threatened lists of no species occur. If you have a high level of threat, then preserve. Once you've preserved, try to restore. No, and then restoration comes in to all other aspects of it. No, so protected areas, no, the whole strategy that countries use around protected areas, it's usually around threatened ecosystems, around high value nature assets that you want to preserve in your country because whatever reason, cultural, nature, just entertainment. Some are just good business, no, so tourism and whatnot. But then if you take that, no, that concept, um, and you add more concepts such as a threatened ecosystem doesn't operate as an island. Well, that's the beauty of nature. Everything just joins together. So you need connectivity, and connectivity operates with two basic concepts that are structure and functionality. That's one thing, for example, that CO2 equivalent as a metric doesn't give you. So you could have really high trees, really high eucalyptus trees or pine trees in the middle of the Amazon where nothing lives beneath, because those are not nature trees, and still you can capture carbon. So you have structure, you don't have functionality. No? So in biodiversity, it is really important that connectivity comes not only through structure, so just planting trees along corridors that you can unite two very important nature assets, but you actually plant the right trees for habitats to occur. And then the concept of habitat is very important because we usually use ecosystem and habitat in a similar way, but habitats actually mean that it's an ecosystem where someone, either you or a species, can actually live, because it has food, because it has a place to nest, because it can have other of the same species. So habitat is important, and habitat is around function. Okay, so you have threatened category, you have connectivity, and we've already talked about preservation and restoration, right? And this is a very big then, you have permanence. Also, here in Colombia, for example, there's a law that states that every company should plant a tree or two trees, I'm not really sure, for each employee they have. And you say, okay, cool, why not? And so you go and you ask someone, where can we plant the trees? You have a company for planting trees? Yeah, sure. I have a company. No, plant 1,000 trees. Okay. And you comply with regulation. And in 5 years, how many of those trees survived? No? Where were they planted? What species did you use? Was it a project based on structure of functionality? I mean, there's no quality to the obligation. In terms of permanence, this is very important. So how do you guarantee that what you're doing in terms of preservation and restoration can actually have an impact in time? Because nature works very slowly. So those those basically four things. So level of threat of the ecosystem, activities that you're going to do, preservation, restoration, connectivity, no, an understanding landscape approach, and permanence. Those are the four main factors that Terrasos uses to structure projects in a way that you can actually say, okay, for this project, I'm going to build a, a financial model in terms of what is required to preserve and restore these areas. If you have to build a nursery, if you have to take the seeds, if you have to plant them, for a 30-year period in a particular ecosystem where you have designed what to connect with what to restore, what to preserve. And then your project comes to life. And then you design it all, you start monitoring what your actions are doing to that ecosystem. And that monitoring basically gives you the result of a biodiversity gain. No? What Terrazos does is that we operate on a unit that is 10 square meters for at least for at least 20 years. Our projects are for 30 years. So we're preserving or restoring 10 square meters for, I mean, equivalent to each credit. The projects are actually hundreds of hectares big, yeah. But each credit is actually 10 square meters for at least 20 years. But structured in a way that you can actually show, and this can be verified by third parties, that you are gaining biodiversity units. It depends on what you measure. Each project is a bit different because the context of the project um, is important. Okay, so that was Terrazos. We spoke about the metrics in biodiversity. So in biodiversity, you usually have an ecosystem metric, you have a habitat metric, and you have a species metric. And people working around all three, they all have, I mean, they all have proper logics to making each of those a valid metric. But then the metric will be important for each project. No? So for example, you can have, the that it's also like a concept for biologists, but umbrella species. Now, so some species are so important in the ecosystems, or not so important, but like are the ones that are in the top of the food chain, that if they're not present in an ecosystem, it means the ecosystem is actually not in a good health. So it becomes a very good indicator for the health of an ecosystem. And also it becomes a proxy for the ecosystem. And that for example, is very common among, I don't know, big cats. And also the jaguar in Colombia, it's the biggest cat we have here. Um, if the jaguar is present in an ecosystem, it means that it has food. It means that structure and functionality actually work. It means that, and it's also a species that travels a lot. And if it's present, it's an indicator for the health of your ecosystem. So you could actually use the presence of a jaguar as an indicator for the health of an ecosystem. Um, the problems that we face is, how do you measure it? No? Sometimes it's easier to measure the health of the ecosystem through not just the richness of the ecosystem, the amount of species that you have. If you have other species indicators like mammals, like birds, like insects, you could even go as far as you want in terms of, I don't know, DNA, no, whatever thing you want to actually understand the ecosystem and measure it. Um, but you could also do it in terms of habitat. You could also do it in terms of species. And then, having understood that thing about the metrics, then most of what people are building right now around standards and methodologies usually have a combination of all of that. How can you actually show that your project um, preserves or restores, that has an indicator that can be measured in time, that can show trajectory, and that it's sufficiently isolated from, like the whole complexity of the system, so that you can actually say, okay, yes, in time, this indicator will actually show me those gains. And then the people that are buying the credits, what they're buying is just the ability to adopt those gains as their own. So when I buy a credit, those gains are mine. I have become part of the project, and those gains are mine. I'm the one that's financing the project in terms, and then you can actually make that tradable, and then it becomes a market, because yeah, why not? Um, so yeah, so far that's what happening. The big standards, no, from the carbon market are coming into the biodiversity landscape, and are creating new, uh, let's say, standards, new biodiversity credit methodologies and standards for this to work. Um, New projects are being developed, piloted, and operated. Um, there are very few in the world, um, but more and more are coming in line. Um, so far, there haven't been, um, I don't know, scandals, let's say, around these sorts of projects as they have with the carbon market, which is good. Yeah? But stepping back to the conversation that we were just having, they will probably come as well. Hopefully not as many, and hopefully this new market learns from that one. Um, and the whole ecosystem around who does the third party verifying, where are those projects located, who's actually doing the accounting of the credits, is it independent, is it traceable, is it transparent? uh, no, those things start to become very important, and those are the things that, in my opinion, buyers should focus on. No, it's understanding the credit as a product, and understanding that high integrity is not just something that you mention, it's something that should give you the security to actually put money into it and gain a biodiversity unit of gain, a biodiversity unit of growth, or yeah. um and if you can do that, if you have those principles in line, if you can understand what it means for credit to be transparent, to be complementary, to have additionality, to no those things, then you can actually understand that the credit is going in a no, the market is going in a good trajectory in terms of achieving natural assets that can be uh, taken to a market, that can be traded, and that could work to bring investment into creating nature. Now, nature positive strategies, whatnot.
I think the way that you've explained it is one, it's clear, which I think is great, because I think that's one of the harder parts is understanding, how the structure actually works. And I think I think one of the big hurdles in the carbon credit industry is the lack of, you don't see it. You're just like, I guess it's correct. I think maybe, and we'll see. But I think what's so interesting about biodiversity, and I love the idea of permanence too. It's looking at what does it actually look like long term. One of the first, I mean, actually, it was the first podcast we did for Goat. It was the idea that 1+1 does not equal 2 in nature. It oftentimes equals more. And it's this idea of like, how can you show that? Because once you show that, it makes sense. And it's easier to say, okay, I'm going to put my money here and it is going to have an impact because I can actually see that impact and it's verified. And I think, the fact that you guys focus so much on data and verification and traceability and transparency, I think that is the big thing, because really at the end of the day, the consumer, they want to know that if they were to spend $1, what is going to be the impact of that $1, and then scale that up. But yeah, we live in such a society where like trust is weirdly a premium. And it shouldn't be. It should be a standard. But that when you put it into the system, that the trust is already built in because you have all this backing of actual data, actual traceability, actual transparency. And I know you guys are probably working on it, but the idea of like making it a market that's tradable. I mean, it's very smart, because if you look at the system of capitalism in the US, it was like that it thrived because you created a market of free exchange. You could take your investments and put it into the things and then trade that thing in the asset value, and like that actually created its own market, career, I mean everything. And when you start to do that with nature, nature becomes the winner of that whole entire process. And that's what I find really fascinating. And when you look at something for 20 years, like of course it'll painfully slow for most humans to be like, all right, cool. I'll watch the grass grow, literally. But I think when the seeing is believing, and when you can actually show the growth and show the change, it suddenly like it clicks with everybody. And that's what I'm really excited about. The growth of Terrasos, and like what you're building is like time will tell, for one, but two, like the foundational aspect of it, like you can already get some proof right out the door. You have habitats, and when you can see more animals, and then when you specifically mention a food chain, like most people don't think about the top, they think about the bottom. Like, well, if the bottom's more prevalent, then perfect, then cool. And you guys are thinking on the other end, if the top of the food chain is present, it means the bottom's healthy too. It means the whole thing is healthy. And I just love the data points you guys actually select. And so where do you find like the most impact right now? Like whether that is that for like anybody just to offset what they're doing? Is it actually the restoration? Is it the preservation? Like what is the main focus right now? Like is it securing the actual land in order to restore it, or is it just keeping it or restoring it? Like where's kind of the focus been?
Okay, so maybe I should explain a bit more of our business model, because that's, I mean, it goes to your question. So Terrazos, we're created, by Mariana Sarmiento. She's our CEO, 10 years ago. And Terrazos basically focuses on, we have like a consultancy area, where we help companies with environmental obligations, plans, strategies, investments in nature. We also work around policy making, and helping governments or multilateral organizations think about this sort of stuff. And we have a business unit called the Habitat Banks, right? So Habitat Banks, they're basically a mechanism that's created in Colombia, no? So it's part of the environmental regulation in Colombia. It was actually a mechanism created in the U.S. in the 70s. There are a lot of countries that have actually tried to implement it, but it doesn't work well in every country because it needs a very robust environmental regulation system in place. Colombia actually has one which is incredible in terms of our neighbors, but yeah, we actually have it, and that mechanism was created so that companies in Colombia can offset their biodiversity impacts. And we're talking about the big companies, right? So in Colombia, you have an oil company or a mining company or a company that's building a road or that's generating electricity. Or big companies, they have to ask for an environmental license. Um, and asking for that environmental license means that you actually have to do an environmental impact assessment. You have to cross it with what you're going to do in that territory, understand what's going to be lost, what your impacts are going to be, pass it through the hierarchy, mitigation hierarchy, which basically means, okay, it's going to be a lot of impact. So why don't you try changing a few things, correcting, replacing with technology stuff? And at the end, you'll have residual impact. So the residue. And that needs to be compensated, and that creates an obligation for that company. So Terrasos, we started in 2013. By 2016, we had our first habitat bank operating for the compliance market of biodiversity obligations in Colombia. What we structured was a project, a habitat bank, that has both preservation and restoration activities, because the obligations, because that compliance market actually needs both. We located that project. So in Colombia, those compensations need to be invested in the same watershed as the impact was caused, and in a similar or equivalent, in the same or equivalent ecosystem as the impact was done. So you actually have, for each watershed in the country, you can actually have the understanding of the market. What are the projects being built there? What are the obligations for each of the projects being built there? What are the ecosystems where those impacts are being caused? And how can you take advantage of it as a company that wants to help? I don't know, an oil company that doesn't know a thing about restoration, then hey, I'll do your restoration for you. But what's the biggest thing about habitat banks? It's a performance-based mechanism. So it's a pay by results mechanism. And then once you understand that habitat banks pay by results, you need, because it's part of the regulation, you need to have all the legal aspects of it, regarding the land property, um, regarding how your project is going to be financed, um, the technical aspects of it. So you need to create an environmental baseline. You need to have monitoring throughout the year. So everything around the habitat banks needs to comply with regulation, and you also need to act as a payment by results model. Then that mechanism, operating in a compliance market, was the first innovation that needed to work in Colombia. Okay, so we started with that. So far, we're the only company in Colombia that has operational habitat banks. No, so we have 8 habitat banks that are registered, 4 that are operational, and there are other 4 that are also registered by other companies but are not operational yet. The whole point of having those habitat banks was trying to understand them in terms of other use cases. And then came the conversation, and it was an international conversation around biodiversity credits. Now, so what do you need to create a biodiversity credit? And for us, it was like, dude, we have habitat banks. That's most of the rigor that you need, because those are projects that are actually thought of from the start. No, they're looking to act as market mechanisms to create high integrity. No, in the compliance market, you have the Ministry of Environment, you have the environmental authorities. They're the ones that guarantee that you don't have double counting, that that each of the hectares that are sold to one company, and you don't have double selling, and that you actually are gaining what you say you're gaining. because it's a performance-based mechanism. So if you take that to a biodiversity, voluntary biodiversity credit market, then it works beautifully, right? So what we did is that we created a protocol. Now, in voluntary markets, you don't have the government to act as that regulator. So you need to create those standards or protocols. So we created a protocol that's based on our experience with the habitat banks, right? And this is not to say that all bio credits, let's say, should be high integrity. I have nothing against people planting trees. Well, just go ahead, plant them. It's just something that you're not going to be able to sell to a US company and a French company and a Chinese company and a Japanese company as an asset because it has too much risk around it. No? But what we're building is high integrity pairs. So once you get all of that, then Terrasos is, yes, of course, we're focusing on the biodiversity credits, but we're focusing on it because it's just a natural thing for our business to evolve to. And because of what you mentioned, what's the beauty of markets? Also, in the compliance market, we have our watersheds in Colombia. No? And what we focused on is okay, where do we build these habitat banks in each of the most, let's say, project uh, intense regions of the country, no, where most projects are being built? That's where you have it. With the voluntary market, your market is infinite. It's not about a watershed in Colombia. No, it's about everyone in the world being able to access biodiversity credit. No, and it's not only for companies as well. It's for individuals. So the idea of taking now in the compliance market, you have 1 hectare becomes one credit, because that's how the country developed this regulation. For the voluntary market, we made it for 10 square meters to become a credit. So one credit costs $30. That's something I'm not saying everyone should be able to afford, but most people should afford, or should be able to afford. And one last thing that, I mean, it's part of the new, let's say, focus for us. We've mentioned it through the sites, but this could be a great place to dig on it. So we have the project structure. Now we have the habitat banks. We have the, let's say, the science or the understanding around biodiversity, how you measure it, what you need to measure, what's your baseline, what's your activities going to be, and how are you going to achieve biodiversity gains, let's say. But we haven't really spoken about where the project is located in terms of a community, in terms of this indigenous populations that now if that project exists, and if you have both preservation and restoration, it means that it has been preserved by someone or by a community. And then how do you take high integrity projects, assets, no, and actually make not only the traceability, the additionality, no, but the equity around a business, no, that should bring development to a territory, not just to Terrasos, but no, the idea is that we're creating businesses around biodiversity. You can just, no, you cannot think that the oil and gas industry will fade out and you'll replace it with what? No, you have to bring something to those territories, and then creating businesses around biodiversity is important. So how these projects occur inside a community, how you plan them with the community, and how you're able to start incorporating new productive, let's say, activities that are in line with biodiversity, then that's the huge challenge. And that's what eventually we hope will create an added value for what Terrasos does in the territories. That's just, it's not really, you can't really measure it through standards, you know. It's how you create projects with the communities, how you actually incentivize that the communities have additional productive activities. No, where you bring in, I know, beehives, where you start working with products that are not non-timber products in forests, where you no, where you incorporate measures. No, so each of the projects has a like a plan of what it's going to do. How do you incorporate social and cultural activities to those plans? So it's not just about preservation. It's not just about restoration. It's also about, I don't know, maybe your project, no, it's located in an area where the community lacks proper health support, or education, or infrastructure, or whatever it needs. How can a project incorporate this? No? And then the project becomes an integral part of territorial development. And if you can achieve that, then you'll have not only high integrity, but the best quality of the high integrity products out there. And then it was a really long answer. But going back to what we're focusing on right now, it's that. So yes, the high integrity is important, but we need to raise the bar. We need to raise the bar of what it means, of how do you actually take those benefits down to the local communities, to the indigenous communities, to the ones that have been safeguarding those territories for so long, and that actually need the support of markets to create proper development, no? That understands the global crisis, that works towards creating nature, but that brings that development to vulnerability, no? To poverty, to a lot of things that are required um, in Colombia, but many other places on Earth.
It's so interesting. So one of the big focuses for goat is really did we choose to define sustainability? And we chose to define it as intentionality, circularity, and community, because the idea was that that is the way to solve any problem, in whether it's climate or any other problem on the planet. If you just apply those three things, it fits. And what I find so cool about what you're doing is it's so intentional about why you guys are doing what you're doing. It's circular in the idea of the inputs, the outputs, the residue, and restoring it. But then it's also thinking about the community and how it can actually benefit that community as well. Like it beautifully encapsulates like exactly, kind of what we believe in a goat, and it shows that that's a proof of concept. Like it's this idea that like you can make a market, you can make an improvement by applying these three things. You can actually make really meaningful change. Because I think going back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast was that, nature's beautiful. The more that we can actually preserve that, the better. But at the end of the day, it also has to make sense for people who, they may not have the time to actually go preserve an ecosystem, or to be able to, have access to nature. But if they actually care about it, how can they still do that at a high quality way and actually verify that it's true? And I love the approach that you guys are taking to it. And I think that the more and more, I think it's a hard problem for consumers to really, and whether that's consumers or businesses, to actually discern all the information, right? Like you guys have an expertise on it, and most consumers, they don't have the time, nor do they really want to. They just want to know that it's actually going to have a positive impact. They want to know if they go to the store, they buy something, that it's going to the right thing. I think that's kind of like, I don't want to say people should do more, but like that's kind of what people can handle because they have things that they are focused on in their day-to-day life, and that's totally okay. And I think that's on our job, whether it's us as a media company, you guys as a technology company slash a preservation company, environmental company, like all the things you guys do. I think it's on us to remove the friction and to make it so seamless for somebody to do it, because I think one of the biggest things is for people to be able to discern the information that comes their way. How do they validate it as quickly as possible? And I think that what you guys are building, it speaks volumes to that. And I like the global aspect of it too. I mean, be thoughtful about that own community, because I think one of the things that we do on our website is we'll ask people, how do you define sustainability? And one of the questions in that is what kind of an impact do you think that you can have as an individual? And it's like, my community, my country, or the planet. Very rarely is it ever the planet. Like, people don't feel that they can actually make an impact across the planet. And I think that we're living in a time where we're so globally connected. We have this crazy culture where like you and I can have a conversation, you're in Colombia and I'm in the United States, and then tomorrow you could be speaking to somebody in Japan, and it's just like that. Like it's so it is the most globally connected point in time I think we've ever been. And so how can we actually bring that narrative to be more, think globally but act locally? How can we actually do that on a sustainability aspect? And I just love the approach that you guys actually have to it, because it's simple yet complex at the same time, because nature is complex, but also nature is simple. It's very, very self-preserving. For you, as an engineer, but also a person who just loves nature, I mean, what's it like to kind of be pioneering this? Like, how does it feel on your side to be, kind of on the forefront of it? Because it's something that's always existed in terms of like, nature and being able to, look at ecosystems and habitats and try and restore them. But what does it look like to kind of be pioneering something that can actually fit in business?
Super exciting. um, okay. So it's challenging. No, usually you in anything you do, or at least that's the way I work. You look for references, right? Who's done it? No, has it worked? How did they do it? How did they manage? No, and that could be, I don't know, just the reviews on Amazon for a particular product. It's the same. No, people bought it. Did they like it? Did they hate it? Does it work? When when you're working on a new thing that doesn't really exist, and those challenges around, no, what you just mentioned, communications. How do you explain this? And also for me, it's easy. Look, we sell a credit. It's 10 square meters for 30 years, but that's not enough. No, it costs $30. So if you look at it, it's $1 per year. That's nothing. No, but that's still not enough. So how do you build around discussions that take people to not to a higher understanding without you having to explain it every time all the way down to the basics? I think that's the challenge. How do you create reputation, for example? No? As I mentioned, we're focusing on high integrity, but that means reputation. Um, if you no Nothing wrong with low integrity. I think every investment in biodiversity needs to occur, but low integrity doesn't need as much reputation as it needs high integrity. So again, it's a huge challenge, um, but it's super interesting. I mean, it's super exciting because it's like one of those things. I personally believe that if this works, that if this gets mainstream, that if this market actually takes off, this could actually be one of the solutions for the environmental problems that we're facing. Same as the carbon market, no, not not that I'm taking one side of the other. They both need to operate. But if you can, I mean, if we can make this work, and if more people understand it, and if more people are into it, then this, I mean, I think it's the way forward. Um, I don't know. Maybe you sometimes feel that you're just like preaching, that you're selling dreams, but it's super exciting to be in a place where you can actually have, like a purpose towards helping with one of the biggest uh, problems facing humanity right now. Um, so yeah, that gives me joy, um, and it's fun, and the team that we have, that Mariana built, it's a great team, and no, the she always mentions, like she has this phrase that we take care of every step. No, it's new. We're not really sure if where we're headed is it's no, it's the place where we should be, where it's going to work, where whatever. But everything we're going to do, we're going to take care of each step, and every step should be a good step, a firm step, a step based on our beliefs, on science, on our understanding of sustainability, of development, of the needs that need to occur. Um, so, I mean, for me, it's a great place to work. I'm super happy.
What's been your favorite part of building this? Because there's always, I don't know. I found sometimes the biggest joy, uh, obviously hindsight 2020, but the biggest joy is actually the challenging times. It was like, oh man, can't believe we built that thing or made it through that, problem that we didn't think that we could actually solve. What's been the favorite part of the process for you?
Um, okay, so I wouldn't say it's completely built, but that's a good thing. Um, so remember, I spoke about the protocol that we designed, right? So this protocol was just a document. It was created as, okay, which should be the guidelines for a project like this to work. Right now, we're understanding that document has to become like a living document. So one of the things that we love to do is actually be super transparent about everything we do. All our methodologies, everything is published. No, the we don't want to become like a company that creates standards. The protocol that we build, everyone can use. Um, Everyone that reaches to us, we help. But then, if if that protocol becomes mainstream, if more projects are built around that protocol that are not projects developed by Terrasos, then you start creating additional responsibilities of your work, and that protocol, yeah, it becomes a living document. Um, and and what that means is that now we're thinking, okay, so that protocol should have like a governance structure. That protocol should have, a way of updating itself to what we're understanding as this process evolves, but also what everyone in the world is understanding, and what needs to happen around, for example, communities. So at first, now that protocol didn't include a social factor. Now we're introducing a social factor because it's something that we understand is one of the cornerstones of each of our projects, and should be for others. And then just, being open-minded about what you're building, not just saying, okay, yeah, it was great, it worked, and now we're super pioneers, whatever. No, this is a continual process of understanding, of creating, of I think that's yeah, that's one of the most interesting parts of the job. Um, and I don't know, it could be no around innovation, it could be around just trying to do right by the work you do. Um, but it becomes super exciting just to be able to go deeper, to always trying to make it clear, always trying to make it scalable, always trying to make it work for everyone. Um, yeah, I think that's one of the things I like most.
Where is your favorite place to enjoy nature? Is it Colombia? And if so, where?
Um, yeah, I think Colombia. Um, nah, man, there's so many beautiful places. The Caribbean coast in Colombia is so beautiful. Now the beaches are incredible. Um, the jungle, it's also incredible. Um, but the places that I don't know are more in my heart are the places I grew up in. So my parents, for example, they come from Manizales. So Manizales is the capital of Caldas, which is one of the departments in Colombia that grows coffee historically. Um, and my grandfather, he had a coffee farm there. Um, we had a huge family. My mother had 7 siblings. I'm the sixth of seven again, and it's a family, like 50 people, and we used to go there every Christmas. Uh, and it's just one of the most beautiful places and it's a coffee farm. It's not in terms of biodiversity, for example, it's not particularly rich, uh, but it's a place I really love. And there's another place where we used to go also a lot. Um, so it's in this is Tolima. It's another department, and it's a hydroelectric dam. Now created. It was a huge dam, um, built in the 1970s, uh, and we used to go there to a tiny little house. It's not even a house; it's more like a hut. So you sleep in hammocks, um, and that is one of the most incredible places. It's really warm. It's super rich in biodiversity. Um, it's also for some people it's scary. So you have snakes and you have scorpions and you have spiders and um, but you can go fishing and you can go skiing because it's a huge lake. Um, so yeah, and Prado. That's also one of my favorite spots in the world.
That's awesome. Well, I like they almost seem like places that are peaceful. That's what I think is really cool about it. How can people kind of get involved with what you're doing? Reach out to you guys, talk to you. What's the best way to do that?
um, I guess through our website. So terrasos.co. Um, that's us. You can either reach out through there. You can buy credits. We have there's a part of like the e-commerce that's Act now, basically, where we have the one projects that issuing voluntary credits. It's there. You could always write through the contact page, or you could write uh, directly to me. She's francisco.gomez@terrasos.co. I mean, we're happy to talk to anyone. That's one of the things that we're happy to do. Right now we're speaking to people in Mexico, in Brazil, in Argentina, people that want to build projects, that want to use the protocol, that want to start issuing credits. And just no companies that want to start buying credits, that want to create nature positive strategies, that also companies in Colombia that want to offset their obligations. So yeah.
Well, and thank you for sharing everything that, I mean, your knowledge is so vast, and your understanding, and it's always there's always more knowledge to be had, of course, always learning for sure, but thank you just for sharing, I mean, everything that you know, what you guys are building. And thank you just for doing what you do, and for being on the podcast to really discuss biodiversity in a way that I don't think it's been talked about. You know, we talk about preservation, we talk about restoration, we talk about nature a lot, but putting it into an actual scalable thing that people can, really get involved with, I think that's huge. And I think that the more and more people learn about it, the more and more people will be saying, hey, yes, I would like to act now on it too. So I just want to say thank you for being on the podcast, talking about everything you're doing. And I'm so excited to really share what you guys are doing on a bigger scale, because it's important. And that's one of the big things at GOAT is to find the people that are actually leading what the future can look like. And I think that this is one of the biggest things that people can really take action on.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you for having me. It's been fun, and hopefully, I mean, that challenge of communicating these sort of things, um, no, we can build on it together.
Thank you so much for listening to the GOAT podcast. You are the reason why we exist and why we show up every single day.
I've spent too many years being against stuff, and I've found now that it's a little bit easier and a little bit more fun to be for something.
How are we going to power the world? How are we going to build the world? How are we going to feed the world?
Company isn't just good or bad, black or white. Usually there's a lot more there, a lot more that they don't know.
It's actually about what you do in your daily life every day can make a huge difference.
Give this episode a share, join our GOAT community, but most importantly, go spend some time in nature, because you might find it a meaningful reminder of the amazing place that we get to call home. I'm Steve Cassingham, and we'll see you next time.